Hey guys, PA Farms. I wanted to make a video here. I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, but it's kind of probably be a rambling video. I don't know if I'll have to post it in two parts. Out in the country here, I don't have access to any kind of hardline internet like cable or anything like that. Everything I do is over the cellular network. It's one of the things living out in the country, I guess. But every once in a while I read some articles in the Successful Farming magazine regarding new farmers, young farmers, tips to help get started, tips to keep going, stuff like that. And some of the stuff's pretty good. I figured I'd make a video since I guess I fall into the category as a young farmer. I'm under the 35 years old that usually they would consider a young farmer. But like I said, some of the stuff they post is pretty good advice. Other stuff, you need some examples. But I just like to give you a little bit of a background and how I got started. First off, I'm a one-man show. My dad didn't farm. He wasn't a farmer. It's a small operation that I run here in Pennsylvania, and my family helps out a little bit from time to time, but for the most part it's a one-man show. Keeps me pretty busy, but again, being a younger farmer, you have a lot more energy, I guess. So I just give you a little bit of a background. I wasn't born into farming. I didn't. I'm not on my parents' home farm. My granddad's farm. That farm is being rented out by somebody else. I don't even farm my home farm. But from early on, I wanted to farm. Now a little bit of history. Yes, my family did have the family farm, and that goes all the way back to the 1700s. That farm, it was a payment for service in the American Revolution. So that piece of land has been in the family for quite a few years. And they had a pretty big operation. It's 375 acres. It was owned by one family. And for Pennsylvania, I suppose that's a good sized farm. They didn't have that many crop acres. I think at the highest they might have had 80. And they had a lot of woods. A lot of that is woodland. And they had a sawmill, hydroelectric powered. And the stories I always heard was they'd farm in the summer months. They'd take a lot of their produce to town and sell it door to door, even eggs and milk, like a lot of these small towns back in the 1800s. And then in the wintertime they would log, and they would saw lumber for people and for themselves. It was like a custom logging and sawing outfit. I have old pictures with the old mule teams and stuff. So fast forward to 1930, my great-grandfather comes into the picture, and he has a son, my granddad. But in 1932, 2 years later, my granddad was 2. He was killed in a sawmill accident. My great-grandfather died in that farmhouse, and my granddad was born in the farmhouse. So I guess he was around 30 years old when that happened. So it was kind of the first sign of tragedy with the operation they had going. Fast forward to the 60s, 50s, and 60s. My grandfather, he was in the military, in the Navy. When he got home, he decided he wanted to go into the dairy industry. And that was around the time when a lot of farms were dairies. Every small farm had their own cows. He just had a bank barn. And he used, I guess, his money from the military. And that was 50s, 60s was around the time when things were modernizing in the dairy industry. He had put an addition on the barn and a milk house, and had regular tie stalls. It was just before he didn't have a pipeline. He had those surge bucket milkers, belly milkers, I guess they call them. Strap goes around the cow, and then you had to dump it in cans, and then he stored the cans in a International Harvester milk can cooler, and then he ran the milk to town to the dairy for processing that way. Like I said, I think he hit the modernization a little early, because it got better a couple years later with dumping stations, and then fast forward even more, you had pipelines and milking parlors, and at least in our area, I'm sure people had it even in the 50s. But did a nice job on the barn. It had a bathroom in it. The farmhouse did not have indoor plumbing in the 60s, so the barn had a bathroom. So that was the first bathroom with a flushable toilet that they had on the farm in the 60s. You had fans in the barn, and it was a pretty modern facility for its time, or what he could afford. I don't know, either way. Then about 1964, my grandfather was diagnosed with skin cancer. And in the 60s, medicine wasn't like it is today. Skin cancer back then was a little bit more serious. It's in the family. My dad had it already. I'll probably have it eventually. But he had skin cancer, had a couple surgeries, and they never could get all of it. It just kept spreading until finally, from what I understand, it got into his spine and his lungs, and it was a slow process for him. I think it was a 4 years of suffering and tough times to try to beat this. And he unfortunately never could. 1968, he passed away at the age of 38. So, two tragedies, back to back, father and son. Like I say, he was 38 years old. And another lost generation. Most times with farms, your granddad, great-granddad, your father farmed, and every year they would upgrade and pass it along to the son and make each generation a little bit further. So my granddad, he had a couple kids. My dad was one of them. My dad was only 9 when he had passed away, and my dad never got into the farm aspect, never got into the farming. They had a couple more issues. There was some other family members that used to help out on the farm pretty regular. And around the time of 1968 through 1970 was a rough time for them. I can't imagine that everybody that was involved with the farm production had passed away. I think there was 3 of them total, family members, including my granddad. So they did their best. My great-grandmother was a pretty tough cookie. A lot of the neighbors tell me that she used to work like a man, was the term that they described. She'd go out on the Farmall Super C. You probably saw it in a past a past video. That is the new Super C that they bought in 1953. It's been on the farm ever since, and now I have it with my operation. So my dad didn't want to farm. He went to be a pastor, and there's nothing wrong with that. So the farm sat. They kept a couple cows for themselves, and then finally sold them, and then they finally rented the ground out. I don't know what time that would have been, 70s, 80s, but it was rented from about mid-70s through 2000, I think, that it was rented out to another couple dairy farmers in the area. They just chopped the hay for grain chop. But and then you come to me, my generation. My dad had 3 sons. My other brothers aren't really into farming. I've been wanting to farm since I was pretty young. Like I said, I didn't technically grow up on a farm. We had the farm. My great-grandmother owned it all the way up until the 90s, and then my dad bought it, and it just sat. I mean, it was like a time capsule. There's still manure in the gutters in the barn. The milkers were still hanging in the milk house on the hooks. The milk cans are still in the milk house. All the equipment was in the sheds right where everybody stopped, right where everything was parked. I mean, it was kind of eerie in a sense, but that's not uncommon with the farms, with family tragedies and issues like that. So I wanted to farm so bad as a young kid. I used to be a kid at the farm, and I'd watch the dairy farmers. They'd be chopping all the hay and everything, and watching these red tractors barnstorming around. Really made an impression on me as a kid. I loved to be on the farm. I loved to run around, explore the buildings. Used to sit on the excuse me. I was just sweeping the shop, so I made a little dust. It really made an impression on me. I was a little kid sitting on the tractors and pretending I was farming as a young kid. So you're in school, and then you go to high school, and I got to the age where I wanted to do some farm work. I wanted to work on a farm. I wanted a job on the farm. In high school, I got a job with a dairy farmer, and I worked for him for, I don't know, 3-4 years, and it was a pretty good example of dairy farming. 6 days a week. Saturdays were the long days. You were there at 5 a.m. and didn't get home till 9 o'clock at night, somewhere in there. And especially in the summertime when I wasn't in school, making forages and doing a lot of work around the farm. I got lucky that the dairy farmer that I was working for, it was just a small family-owned dairy. I was just a part-time kid that he hired on. He didn't like doing field work. He said he'd rather milk the cows twice in the morning than have to get on the tractor and go out to the field. So as a young kid, that was just music to my ears. I got to learn a lot, plowing and mowing hay and you name it. It was a really good experience. If anybody has kids, or if you're a younger kid and want to farm, that's the way to do it. Get on a farm. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be hot in the summer. It's going to be dirty, but if this is what you want to do, that's kind of tying into my whole story here about beginning farmers. I don't think farming is something that you just one day say, hey, I want to farm. It's something that, and you can't really go to school for it either, I don't think. I know a lot of guys go to college, and I did too. I was in college for business, but